I try to look at the big picture. I know what's happening now. I know what happened 10 years ago. We talked about this many times. We first talked about Tesla, and it was just like, you're out of your mind. This is never going to happen, and of course it happened. So where are we going to be another 10 years? We're going to have solar-powered electric cars, and electric cars are going to get a 500-mile range.
And they're going to drive for you.
Maybe not in 10 years, but yeah. So, I don't
know. Elon Musk keeps saying it's going to drive for me next week.
He says a lot of stuff. And listen, what he's done is absolutely amazing. You can't take away from what he's accomplished. But yeah, I think, at least from an investment standpoint, it's really important for people to separate maybe their own political or philosophical ideology from what's actually happening.
Hey there, welcome to the Angel Research Podcast. I'm here today with Jeff Siegel, Managing Editor of Greenship Stocks. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, sir.
So what's going on, Jeff? You're down from New York into sunny Baltimore.
It's very nice out today.
Like that. It is nice weather out today. So I don't know if did you see Brian's visit on
the ESG thing?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So I'm sure you got some things to say,
of course,
about ESG. And it's funny because you're my go-to ESG guy to get information about this sort of stuff.
Right.
When that Biden law passed, I was like, what does this mean? And you were pretty much like, hey, they can, but no one's being forced to do it, at least not yet.
Right. That's come up a lot. So I've talked about this in the past. One of the, I think, objections to this is, well, maybe they're just laying the groundwork for what's to come. It's possible. That's possible with anything. I don't think that's monopolized by ESG. But the problem, I think the problem with ESG is what we define as ESG as just regular people. Like we don't run an ESG fund, or we're not fiduciaries that look at ESG risk factors. So it's very easy for someone to say, they see the word environmental or social and they immediately think wokeism. Mm-hmm. The fundamentals of ESG really have nothing to do with that. So when I was watching the one you did with Brian, and you guys were talking about the Bud Light thing.
Yeah.
So to me, that's not ESG. Okay.
No, I would agree.
Yeah, I think it's, if you want, I don't really like using the term wokeism either, because again, I don't think anyone can really fairly identify what that is.
And it's changed. It's become very, polarizing.
Absolutely, yeah, which is unfortunate, because I think by polarizing, by becoming polarizing, it makes it harder for us to come to an agreement on anything. And again, that's true with anything. But the Bud Light thing, I remember seeing that. When I first saw that, I'm like, I don't get it. Like, why would you do that?
Right.
And so the immediate response from the media was like, oh, they're trying to be woke. It seems to me that someone worked there was trying to do that. They were trying to say, we're gonna put this person on the can, and we're gonna somehow, I don't know what they were thinking.
Yeah.
It was just a really horrible idea, but I hate seeing that getting equated with ESG.
Yeah, I don't think it's so. Is anybody in charge of ESG? Like, who invented this thing?
So ESG,
BlackRock?
No. So ESG came around. It's been around for a long time. Even when I first got into the space, that's probably 2006 when I really started investigating the idea of ethical investing. And ESG was a thing then. But it was predominantly just like an idea. It was, like it is now anyway, voluntary. But it was so under the radar.
But it seems like people are feeling pressure to have these a certain level of scores because of XYZ. Like, where's that pressure coming from?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, because I don't believe that there are enough people out there that are saying we demand ESG. I don't believe
most
that
people
for
don't even know
second.
what the hell it is.
Yeah, and most people don't care. I know plenty of people that say, I want to invest in an ethical investment fund. Well, if you look at most of them, they still have oil companies in there. They still have chemical companies. So it's just, to answer your question, no one's in charge. There really isn't. There's an idea. There's an idea of what the structure is, but in coming up with ESG scores, it's so relative. So the S&P has their own ESG index, which is, again, I mean, they have Exxon. I think is like the top of that list. I almost think it's kind of like in the mind of whoever's talking about it. I mean, to go back again to the idea of ESG, it's just a framework for people to follow.
The question is why? Like, why does there need to be a framework?
So that's a really good question. So when it first started, it was geared towards ethical investors, socially responsible investors. I don't think it was ever meant to go beyond that. And then what happened was, in my opinion, Wall Street co-opted that. They say, here's an opportunity for us to make some money. And I'm not mad. I mean, I get it. Yes, it is an opportunity because you can go to people that say, yes, I only want to invest in renewable energy companies or companies that are making the world a better place. That's fine. I mean, there's money to be made in that. And then it kind of took on a life of its own where you had some of these people who co-opted it, but kind of bastardized what it was supposed to be. And then the media came in and I guess politics came into play, and they'd say, well, this is a great way for us to like stake our claim.
Yeah.
So like, Democrats and those on the left would say, ESG is important. We need to monitor all this stuff for our investments. And then the right would say, oh, this is just wokeism. Neither side is right. Okay. I mean, it's, I know. I keep kind of going off the topic here, but where to come from, I guess, is your question. And why? How did we get to this place? Again, I think it started out as a voluntary thing. It was designed for a small group of people. And then it took on a life of its own. I think Wall Street co-opted it, and then politicians co-opted it, and now nobody knows what the hell it is. And I can tell you, I always look at just the basic framework of it. Again, environmental, social governance. 3 things that you should look at as a fiduciary if you are analyzing risk factors. That's all it should be. And in my opinion, I really wish the ESG label never existed. I wish that fiduciaries just called it risk factor number 17, or you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I see what you're saying. But you can see how, Brian and a lot of people think is like, okay, there's this, why did they even need to pass a law that was like, hey, you're allowed to, like, it just seems like that goes against, if it's voluntary, then the free market will work it out, and they will just add that, and many have, you know what I mean? It's the same way, like, hey, I don't know, do I want to buy a house, in Florida, because it might on the coast, and it might get hit by a hurricane, not necessarily because of climate change or whatever, but just like hurricanes hit Florida, they have for hundreds of years.
Right.
That's a risk factor. But now they're like forcing people, or at least nudging them towards that. So you can see how the next step could be, these big, Wall Street guys co-opting it, being like, hey, we're going to lobby Congress now to be like, hey, like Brian said, 5% of your retirement portfolio has to be in ESG.
Right.
10% has to be in these socially responsible companies that
right.
some organization deems, based on all these scoring factors. And like you said, it doesn't even really matter anymore because Exxon is, higher than Tesla and all this kind of
right.
BS.
I don't know how. I think that would be very difficult to pull off, because then you have to involve the SEC in coming up with new rules. And again, this is all relative. So let's say that there needs to be a certain ESG score. Well, what do you base it on? I mean, there's literally thousands of ways you could look at that. I just don't think there's an appetite for it in this country. I don't think there's an appetite for it in Congress. And quite frankly, the only reason Biden did it was to cater to his base. That's
right.
it. I mean, there's no teeth. It meant nothing. It literally meant nothing.
Check this box. Let's move on. I can, when I run for re-election, I can kind of say that I
Exactly.
care about the environment.
And Biden's good at that. Like it's an empty gesture, just like with legalization and decriminalization. He said, "Oh, we're going to let all these federal prisoners go for cannabis charges or whatever it was." And
right? Wasn't
it was
it like 10 people or something?
I think it's up to like 30 now. It's like, and it's such. And here's the thing: it's an empty gesture because the president does have the ability, either through himself or through his advisors, to move to a path towards decriminalization. He can't come out and say, "Okay, it's done," but he has the power to make it happen through his advisors, through his cabinet. He's not done that, so it's really funny to me when I see people say, "Oh, Biden's, he gets it and he wants to end on the war on drugs." I'm like, "No, he doesn't. He's done nothing." When I think it was even maybe like a month ago when they said the total number of people that have been released. I don't think it was 30. It was like 312 or something. Jason, there are like tens of thousands of people in jail right now for minor drug offenses. And they're still going to be in jail while he's in office and when he's out of office. So it's like typical politician, empty gestures. And I think he really made the case worse because as soon as he did that, it was like a perfect opportunity for the right to attack him.
Yeah, to be like to say exactly what you're saying. Like, hey, this is just a fake political move.
Right. And then meanwhile, I see this thing with DeSantis saying, we're going to outlaw ESG. So, okay, how do you do that? Are you going to go to a fund and say, you cannot consider extreme weather events in your analyses? Well, that's like you're basically crippling that person's ability to
the outlawing, I think it's just one of those things where you say like, hey, look, at the end of the day, a fiduciary, it has to have the person's best interest in mind. And so like, to me, that's, returns, right?
Absolutely.
You have to look at returns. If you think that some of these environmental factors are risk factors, then you can take those into account, like you said. But calling it ESG is basically like calling it woke.
But it begs the question: what is going to happen now? So if there is, let's say there's an analyst that works for a fund and says, "Okay, I'm looking at this insurance company that we may invest in." I don't know how the new law works. So is he not allowed to look at climate change risk factors? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. If he's not, then do you just say, okay, well, let's just call it weather events, extreme weather events, or even like social, where we talk about you're looking at a company that has a history of sexual harassment. Well, that company could be in line for a major lawsuit. Well, why would you want to invest in a company that has that risk?
Yeah, I mean, to me, like you said, like people are already doing that.
Yeah.
Like already, you don't need to have this scoring system.
Right.
Like if a company has lawsuit liability, like that's already that you should be taking in that into an account.
But does it change now in Florida is my question. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm kind of putting it out there. Yeah. So again, if a fiduciary says, okay, I'm looking at this company that has a history of sexual harassment, is there like a power is there someone that works for DeSantis says, no, you can't do that because that's ESG, that's woke.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening, but just as someone would say, are they laying the groundwork for, forcing us to do ESG? Mm-hmm. I look at the other side of that. I say, are they laying the groundwork for fiduciaries to essentially be incompetent?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I tend to not think there's a grand conspiracy or anything, but people take advantage of the situation is always what happens, right? So it's just like, hey, every step of the way, how can we make money around this? How can we get around? Which, I mean, that's capitalism. You can say it's like gone too far or whatever, but it's just people take advantage of the situation. They're, they're not able to corral this huge conspiracy around it, but people are behind the scenes, being like, okay, yeah, I see what's going on here. Let's position ourselves here, like the BlackRocks of the world, and like, hey, forcing corporate boards to do X, Y, Z, and hey, get on board if you're not. So,
but if you look at BlackRock, though, like whatever they decide, that's not the government. Like it's their decision, and for the government to come in,
they have power.
That's fine, but if the government comes in and says, well, you can't do this anymore, that goes against the underlying idea of free markets. They and that's what I talked about with Biden. Who are you to tell us that it's now okay for us to consider this. You never had a say in that to begin with.
Yeah.
You know, anytime someone starts a sentence off with "should the government," I'm like,
Yeah.
no. You know?
Well, I mean, that brings up a good point because I think it was last night Trump, did his CNN thing and he's talking about drill, baby, drill. There's definitely been this move by the administration under Biden to sort of tamper down the oil. I think it seems like maybe they're loosening it because oil prices shot back up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where does the government come into play in terms of stoking the renewable energy at this point? Is it time for renewable energy to stand on its own? You know what I mean? Is does it need? I posted a chart actually in the Discord, and I sent it to Keith actually because basically it was a chart of government subsidies, and wind power I think is the most government subsidies on a total. Then solar, nuclear and oil and gas are like way down, but then they actually flipped it and they measured it on a per kilowatt basis, and I think wind actually came way down because I guess it's utilizing its subsidies better than it would solar. So like solar's at the main, like where are we at, particularly solar power?
Well, okay, so to back up, in terms of where should the government be involved, my answer is always going to be it shouldn't be. And that's for anything, whether it's renewables or coal or nuclear. Nuclear today could not exist without subsidies. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's been that way since it started. Those subsidies have never gone away, and it's still cost prohibitive. Now, there are really interesting technologies that are coming up in the nuclear space that I know Keith has talked about.
Yeah, I saw the like mini nuclear
reactors. That's
reactors.
fascinating, and what's really cool about that is it's much cheaper to use, it's much safer to use, so that accomplishes a huge issue. I think the future of nuclear is strong if we utilize new technologies. The old nuclear power plants, they're going to have to be retired at some point. To build a new nuclear power plant based on old technology makes no sense from a safety perspective and from an economic perspective. In terms of the way we subsidize things, it's such a slippery slope because there's so many ways things are subsidized, either directly or indirectly. And one thing I always look at when I talk about indirect subsidies is look at the renewable fuel standard, which started under the Bush administration, continued under Obama, continued under Trump, and is continuing under Biden. And basically, we've spent billions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, to grow corn to turn into ethanol to put in our tanks. It is one of the greatest one of the greatest government welfare scams of all time, because the Republicans love it because their states get it. The Democrats get it because they think it's environmentally friendly. It's not. If you really dive into it, you're no better off using ethanol than you are using regular gasoline. So that's an indirect subsidy. It's like the government is mandating that we use ethanol, so we have to pay for it. That's different than a direct subsidy where they say, okay, we're going to give X amount of dollars to like a production tax credit or something like that. But everything has always been subsidized. Gas, oil, coal, nuclear, all this stuff has always been subsidized. So I don't think it's right to call out the renewable energy industry as saying, okay, well, you guys are getting more subsidies. Well, the renewable energy industry, the amount of subsidies they've received over, let's say, the last 50 years, probably pales in comparison to all the subsidies that have gone into coal and nuclear over the years.
Yeah.
In addition to the indirect subsidies, in addition to the way we subsidize our land, the way we subsidize our natural capital. I mean, you have an oil spill, that's the damage that's done to the fishing lanes, the damage that's done to the tourist areas that have been affected by oil spills. All that kind of stuff is never figured into the equation. It's still subsidized by the taxpayer, but you never read about that. So I don't think it's fair to criticize the renewable energy industry for getting subsidies. But moreover, I think the solution to this is to not subsidize anything,
right,
and let the free market do what it does. Because I firmly believe if there were no subsidies, it would primarily be nuclear. It would be the new nuclear technology. It would be solar, wind, geothermal, smart technology for like transmission, storage. Natural gas would run its course because it's so heavily subsidized. People don't want to talk about that either. Coal's done, So I think we would have a proper transition, but there's so many embedded interests. So you're never as much as I can sit here and spout off, we should have no subsidies. It's never going to stop. It's just not.
So solar power in particular, what's been the movement on the technology front from that side of things? Because I mean, solar power has been around for since the 70s, right?
Before that, yeah.
So is there going to be a moment for solar where it reaches? There's always this like grid parity idea. Mm-hmm. Like, is that ever going to happen, or is it just slowly inching up and getting better and better, smaller and smaller?
Well, it's getting cheaper and cheaper to produce these things. On a levelized energy cost analysis, solar and wind are actually cheaper because the amount of money that costs to build it, you get a certain amount of power that comes from that. And so it's called a levelized cost. So solar and wind will always come ahead. But the problem is it's still more expensive up front. If you want to build a big solar park or wind park, those prices are coming down rapidly. So from a utility scale perspective, you're going to continue to see more wind farms, more solar farms. Being pragmatic about this, it makes more sense to have distributed solar in people's homes, on their roofs, on warehouses, buildings. But the utility companies don't make money that way, so it's never going to happen. So the idea that we should pursue that is great in theory, but in reality, it's never going to happen. In terms of solar technology, it hasn't come much further since, let's say, 10 years ago, except for the production of the cells and the panels, which has come down, like I said, quite a bit. Moving forward, there's some really fascinating solar cell technologies that are more durable than we had previously, and these are the ones that we're going to start seeing on cars. They'll be integrated into vehicles, which is a huge deal because we've seen some companies now that are developing cars that have the solar cells integrated into the body of the vehicle that are going to give you another 40 or 50 miles of charge just by sitting outside all day. Yeah,
that's a big deal because I had this conversation with my father actually because he recently drove a Tesla. He borrowed it from somebody and he was like talking about, and basically the big hang up, which I'm sure you know, is range, right? Like not knowing exactly if you're going to be close to a charging station and I want to go XYZ. It's just like there's this lack of freedom that is not there when you have a gas power. It's like, oh, there's a gas station around every corner. Obviously, if you're out sort of in the middle of nowhere, you still got to oh my God, 20 miles to the gas station, I got to make it there. But the biggest hang up I've seen just from people that aren't really interested in the technology is the range bit. Mm-hmm. So where are we at with the range? Because I've been teetering with getting a car, electric car, and I told you earlier my Ram truck is a diesel and it gets 600 miles per tank. Right. 29 miles per gallon with the eco diesel. So are we close to there? Is solar on a car going to put it over the top, or how close are we to being able to? I know the projections are nuts for everybody who wants an electric car, but it's still pretty gas powered still rules. Yeah. So just looking at the data, and I think I mentioned this before, I always look at Bloomberg data because it's always it seems to be the most sound. If you look at historically speaking, Bloomberg's pretty much on point, and they're showing by 2030, 50% of all new car sales will be electric. So I'm basing my projections on that. So by 2030, the standard range, all electric range, is going to be about 300 miles, which is not a lot when you consider, like you said, you have a 600-mile range. Yeah, and that's on the high end, but a regular car, it's going to get you about 450. Yeah, exactly. So it's one of the things. And it takes you 5 minutes to fill up at a gas station. Right. So there's still this. We're still transitioning. And that's what I try to explain to people that are curious about where the space is going. We know that 70% of all daily commuters drive, I believe, no more than 40 miles per day. So
for most people, an electric vehicle is fine. You're not gonna be in a situation where you're gonna run out of charge if you fit into that category. But the question does arise: what do you do if you're taking a longer trip? You take your road trip somewhere.
Well, and you're assuming also that people have like chargers installed in their house, like
right.
People that live in apartments or condos, they don't have a garage,
Right.
or it's upfront. I don't know, it's like $1,500, $2,000 to get a charger, like a legit charger, like put in your house, and then all that kind of stuff. So
So there's definitely some cities that are. So New York is trying to put this thing through where they're going to put up. Charging stations along the curbs.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Who has to pay for them?
So I think what's going to happen is the utility companies are going to pay for them because they'll make money off of them.
But I mean, you still got to pay for. You got to
pay for your electricity.
It's like a parking meter kind of thing.
Yeah, if just like you would charge, you got to pay for your gas. You would have to pay for electricity.
You're gonna park. Can you park? You have to have an electric car to park there.
I think so.
I hate seeing the parking lots and the electric car. Although around here, they're usually full.
Yeah.
There's usually an electric car getting in there, but
I mean, it's. I obviously because I like EVs, I don't mind it that they're there. But there's still obstacles to cross. I mean, I told you about New York. I think California is doing something like that too.
Of course, New York and California.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's mostly those. I think maybe.
Hopefully, they won't go bankrupt before they pay for it.
Yeah, you know how that could be. So that's an issue for sure. There are apartment complexes that are now actively putting charging stations because they have become kind of like an add-on. Yeah. So as more people get electric cars,
I'm just wondering though, because they're saying 50% of new how is it right now? There's a couple of charging stations, but relative to the number of cars that are in there, it's there's no way it's a couple. So if 50% of the cars are there, you're gonna have every time you have a parking spot, you're gonna have a charging thing in there.
Well, it's not 50. So 50% of all new car sales will be
all new car sales. Yeah, but so I mean, you're saying. I mean, everyone's saying hey, everything's gonna be electric in 15, 20 years or whatever. No,
not
I just don't I just don't see how. You know what I mean?
It's a great investment opportunity right there, because
charging stations.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just the infrastructure itself. You're absolutely right. I mean, Norway had this problem too. So Norway heavily subsidizes their EV industry. In fact, by 2025, they're supposed to be completely off internal combustion. Heavily, heavily subsidized. It would never work here. And one of the problems they had early on was not having enough charging stations. But they fixed that.
That's one of the reasons I'm interested in the integrated solar into the stuff, right? Because you don't have to pay for that.
Right.
And you know what I mean? If you're in a garage, I guess you're not going to be able to, but if you're just out regular parked, so it's one way to sort of alleviate some of that demand of having to charge, you don't even have to plug in. Right. You can do it while you're driving. That's going to be pretty sweet.
Huge advantage. So a friend of mine has a Ford F-150 electric, and so he charges his at his house. He's a firefighter, and then when he goes to work, there's a charging station there, and he plugs in there while he's at work. So he never has to worry about not having a charge, and he lives in an area where he can have a charger.
Have you rode in that F-150?
Oh yeah, it's
nice.
It's
I
so
saw him. I saw they have a electric Ram out too.
So the Ram is coming out. I heard there's some problems with the Ram right now, but it's also supposed to have they're offering 600-mile range. Which I'll believe it when I see it.
I mean, hey, that's what I get with my diesel Ram, so.
Yeah, but the problem with electric cars is they say it's a 600-mile range. It's probably not.
Yeah.
I mean, that's under the most perfect conditions which don't exist.
Right.
So you kind of have to take that into consideration. But I forgot where I was going with this. But yeah, so with this, having solar integrated into the vehicle makes a huge difference, especially, again, if we're talking about if you get 50-mile range because you have solar and you only drive 40 miles a day, you're never going to have to plug in. You're never going to have to pay to fuel your car, which is a huge game changer.
Yeah.
We talk about about cities and places. I mean, what a great opportunity. I think it's going to be a combination of those things.
Yeah, and I think we can kind of agree to that there's still going to be they're working on these consumer level trucks, but all of the industrial stuff, like those are going to be the last. They might, you even see a lot of those using natural gas and stuff these days. So there's a lot of options out there.
I think those options are gonna kind of disintegrate though soon,
You
because
think so?
As it becomes cheaper and cheaper to build the batteries and make electric vehicles, natural gas powered vehicles, they're not going to be able to compete. They just won't. I mean, not right now, but give it maybe, I don't know, another 10 years. It's not going to, if you run a fleet, why would you spend money on natural gas, which is it's constantly fluctuating, where you can lock in to your electric rates, or you have solar power in your fleet, and then you power from that. So some school bus fleets are doing now.
Yeah.
So I try to look at the big picture. I know what's happening now. I know what happened 10 years ago. We talked about this many times. We first talked about Tesla, and it was just like, you're out of your mind. This is never going to happen, and of course it happened. So where are we going to be another 10 years? We're going to have solar-powered electric cars, and electric cars are going to get a 500-mile range.
And they're going to drive for you.
Maybe not in 10 years, but yeah. So, I mean...
I don't know. Elon Musk keeps saying it's going to drive for me next week.
He says a lot of stuff. And listen, what he's done is absolutely amazing. You can't take away from what he's accomplished. But yeah, I think, at least from an investment standpoint, it's really important for people to separate maybe their own political or philosophical ideology from what's actually happening. I know there are plenty of people that are like, I don't like electric cars because maybe they have this idea that it's something for tree huggers, or
it's pretty pervasive. I mean, I was down, you go down south and they do not like electric cars down there.
Right.
They just do not. That's why I said, I think it's going to take something that's it's a no-brainer,
right,
for it to do it. So the range has to be 2 to 3 times more than you would get in your gas, and not have to, people don't like change, and they also don't like inconvenience.
Right.
So once the convenience and the cost overrides, then it's like you're a dumbass for buying this gas powered.
But think about the convenience. That's a really good point. It's so convenient to plug your car in at night and wake up in the morning with a full tank. You never have to go to the gas station, ever. And the amount of times you're going to have to go to a public charging station
I kind of like going
limited.
to the gas station.
Do you really?
Yeah, I get myself a 5-hour energy, get a drink, you know what I mean? And then I come out but if it was, 1/10 the cost, then I could forego that, for sure.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I think we do put too much pressure on the idea of that we have to have, this charging stations everywhere, the way we have gas stations.
Yeah, people can't get out of hey, it's got to be just I have to go into a station, fill it up quickly. Right. Yeah, and so if you get 1,000-mile range, then it's really not a big deal to charge it overnight, and or it's easier to make it to the next charging station if you have that much. So last topic I want to hit before we finish up is, you're a big lab-grown meat guy. Mm-hmm. So someone just posted this about a study that came out that said lab-grown meat can be worse for the environment. You saw that? Yeah. So I didn't read it. I'm just headline thing here, but basically, I'm wondering what and look, not that I don't care about the environment, but at the end of the day, I think we agree it's hey, if this is cheaper, then it may win out. You know what I mean? Right. And especially if you can do these customized, I really want to eat some tiger meat, or I shouldn't say tiger, but not have to kill a tiger, you know what I mean?
Right,
or like a dinosaur meat, like a woolly mammoth steak.
Oh, I would never do that.
Yeah, I want to try it. I just want to.
Really?
Yeah, I want to try it. if it's good, it's good. But there's these ideas that hey, you can kind of produce this meat that is very it's more healthy, and you get more all the nutrients and all that kind of stuff. And if you're into the lab grown meat and stuff, is that you think it's going to be a big thing, not next year, but over the next 15, 30 years or so, like that. So is there an environmental component to that because of people like PETA that don't want to kill animals and all that kind of stuff? Or is it more just keeping up with the food demands of like population growth and all this kind of stuff.
It's that, and it's economics. Yes, I mean, people that don't want to kill animals, this is great for them. Particularly people that maybe went vegan but miss meat, and I mean, there are people that are like that, and they try to eat the plant-based burgers, and it's just not. Come on, it doesn't taste the same. It's economics. That's what it boils down to. And a really good way to look at this is when I go to events, cultured meat events. It's not like, I think people think it's going to be mostly just scientists and vegans, and there are scientists and vegans, but there are reps from Tyson, from ADM.
Yeah.
They would much rather produce meat in a warehouse than have to run a concentrated animal feed lot, because it costs so much money to do that, and there's a large risk factor involved there too. When you're producing beef, okay, well, you have to provide the feed for the beef. Well, if you have a drought or extreme weather conditions, that's going to affect the price of feed. So that affects the price of the meat production. Then you have a drought or heat wave too. It could kill off the
I mean, chicken wings. I love chicken wings. Chicken wings have gone up like double in the past it's up there. So yeah, I get that. And you hear about like the mad cow disease and like, hey, this disease, like for some reason, eggs have gotten like crazy expensive.
Yeah.
I don't think we can lab grow eggs. You think we could you can?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can lab grow in anything.
You can lab grow in pretty much anything. Because all you're doing, that's an interesting thing. And it really took me a while to wrap my head around this. It's the same cell structure. So basically, instead of growing meat like beef in a cow, you're just growing it in a bioreactor. A cow is a bioreactor. It's just that we made this bioreactor and God made the cow, but using the bioreactor is much more efficient. And as the costs go down.
Is there any ethical, like, people, like, concerns about that think, like, hey, like, because it doesn't have a brain, like, but it's still, like you said, it's still, like, there's still a feedstock that is coming from a live.
So right
You're
now,
essentially like cloning, right?
Right now, it's the only thing that keeps it from being completely vegan is that it uses what's called a bovine growth serum, which comes from the calf.
So vegans probably have issues with that?
Well, yeah, because you're taking something from an animal.
Okay.
But there are companies that are producing a synthetic version of that. And that is happening. That's going to happen. So at some point, you're not going to take the growth serum from calves anymore. It will all be done synthetically. Once that happens, it's completely vegan. There's no animals involved.
But
except for the cell. I mean, you can have like the stem cell, but you're not going to.
You're never going to please vegans, Jeff.
I don't care.
I think that's where there's a resistance to this, kind of like the solar energy or the electric vehicle thing, because it's kind of like, okay, like all this shit stuff, because we just want to placate vegans because they don't want to kill animals.
Yeah.
And so, and that's, or, the big thing was, hey, cows do more emissions than, this plant, like
right.
You want to get rid of cows, and then vegans are like, yeah, we want to get rid of cows too. Like, and it's just like, there's no winning here.
No, well, it's funny because I actually love vegan food, and I would say most of my diet is, I eat meat, but most of my diet is, I eat a lot of fruits and vegetables and grains. It's just my diet. That's what I prefer. But the funny thing, and I'm not trying to disrespect anybody's,
No, go ahead, do it.
The thing of it is, I have a lot of friends who are vegan, and I respect their decisions. But when you eat a plant, there are millions of microbes in the soil that die when you harvest that crop, but you can't see them. They're still living beings. So there's no way you could ever live and eat without killing something. It's just that you can't see the microbes. You can see the cow.
Yeah, those don't count.
Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to talk about the economics of it. I'd like to explain like the trajectory of how I see this playing out, because I think this is exactly what's going to happen. So right now, we're still in the earliest phase. It's very expensive to produce this meat, significantly more inexpensive than it was 10 years ago. Massive drop in production costs. When it reaches that point where it becomes cheaper to produce meat in a lab, that's when the first thing that's going to happen, all the fast food companies are going to come in. Now, McDonald's, let's say it's a McDonald's hamburger, most of it's filler. There's not a lot of beef in it as far as I know. Or just any kind of, and I'm not criticizing, it's just, it is what it is. But any kind of fast food restaurant that uses any kind of meat. Let's say Kentucky Fried Chicken spends X amount of dollars on chicken nuggets. Let's say, every year they spend, I'm just throwing a number because I have no idea, like $1 billion a year on chicken to make their chicken nuggets. Well, there's a company now that can produce the same exact chicken to their specifications and do it for half the price. The improvement in margins that you'll see because of this cheaper lab-grown meat is a huge deal. It's not just that it's cheaper to produce, but there's no more risk factors. Again, they're not going to get a call from the chicken producer and saying, we lost a bunch of chickens because of the drought. That's not going to happen
But
anymore.
are people going to socially resist that? Like, I ain't going to KFC. They got that lab-grown stuff.
I think there might be a little resistance, but if you go to fast food to eat, you don't really care about what you're eating. You know what I mean? I mean, it's all chemicals is what you're eating. So, and honestly, the way you can produce that meat, it can actually be produced in a healthier way. So say that the chicken nuggets are now produced with more they can make it with more protein or less fat or less, it's designer meat. The KFC can say, I want 3 different versions of this chicken nugget, and they can get it.
So the future, I'm sure you saw the robots running fast food restaurants now and the kiosks. So the future is a fast food restaurant run by robots producing lab-grown meat that's cheaper, tastes better, and is healthier.
Yes.
Sign me up.
See what I'm saying?
All right, I think that's about time to wrap it up here. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Always an interesting conversation. I would encourage people to join our Discord. We'll put the link at the bottom in the description to join the Discord. If you join the Discord, you'll get these little articles that the editors pass around. You can talk to Jeff, post in there, and all the other editors. They'll be chiming in on what's happening in the markets and all that kind of stuff. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.